On this episode of Hot Rod Hoarders, we buy another old drag car. This time it's an old Ford Pinto, and you won't believe the setup on this thing. It is crazy. So stay tuned. Let's check it out. Alright, by now you know the drill. I've got to give you some backstory on how we found this car. And it's another situation where we didn't necessarily find it. It found us. And my dad has a huge network of friends who come and hang out at the shop. They, socialize there every day almost. But he does have some regular customers who have had cars painted, have cars built there at the shop. And one of those guys is Ernie Langford. And he's had drag cars, hot rods, rock crawlers, all different types of vehicles. And he knows what we like. We like old magnesium wheels. We like old drag cars. We like old hot rods. So one day he called my dad and he said, "Hey, I've found a car that you guys probably want." And he was right. We did want it. And it turned out to be this 1971 Ford Pinto drag car. Ernie was actually very familiar with this car because he raced with this guy back in the 70s. He said the guy just pretty much gave it up after one of the local tracks shut down temporarily. They actually opened back up, but it closed down. He just pretty much put all of his racing stuff away and never got back to the track. The guy's name was Robert McKenzie. He's right there in 10 Mile, Tennessee. To me, personally, what makes this thing cool is where the driver sits. This thing is set up kind of like an old funny car. You sit in the middle of the car, way back at the back, sort of over the rear end. And, I mean, it's just crazy because it's an all-steel car. It doesn't have a flip-up body. It doesn't have anything that's like a funny car except for the fact that you sit in the center and you got a roll cage right around you. To my surprise, the fabrication on this car was really good. Most of the time, cars built in the 70s, especially ones with a crazy setup like this, were not that well built. They were not, well thought out, let's say. And this car, you could tell it was purpose built. Engine sits way, way back in the car. Pretty much where your transmission tunnel should be. That's where the engine is sitting. And then the driver sits directly behind it. It has a rectangular tube chassis. And then it's grafted into the original Pinto front frame section with the independent front suspension and little bitty disc brakes and all that. All Pinto stuff. But it has been changed over to 5-lug. So it has 5-lug US Indy 15 by 4.5 inch front wheels. Those are really good pieces. That was another reason to buy this car because it had a really killer set of wheels. 15 by 4s in the front, 15 by 10s in the back. You cannot go wrong with that. Out back, this thing has ladder bars and coilovers, a narrowed 9-inch Ford, just kind of a timeless drag car setup. And according to Ernie, this guy ran a really, really low rear end ratio, like a 588 or a 613 or something crazy like that. And the reason for that is it had a really high winding 351 Cleveland engine and a C6 transmission. And they were all doing 1/8 mile racing at the time, so they wanted it to be doing everything it could do in 660 feet. So looking inside of this thing, you've got that center seat, which is crazy and cool, but looking elsewhere, you can see that they've completely gutted this car. All of the inner structure of the body is gone. I mean, it's just an outer shell of a Ford Pinto. And they've put wheel tubs in, they've put, just flat sheet metal floors. Everything here is purpose built. This thing, it can't weigh very much. It's got to be a super light car. And obviously with the engine set way back like that, the weight balance is way to the rear tires. So, this thing was probably really easy on parts because it was so light. And I'm sure that it hooked up good with, considering the weight balance and the fact that it's got a pretty good sized tire tucked up under the back of this thing. One of the things that I like about the car is the fact that that old rectangular plastic scoop is actually set back into the windshield, because obviously the engine is way back in there. Really, it kind of looks like an old Pro Stock car, but from what I can see, this doesn't have any kind of Pro Stock history. And from what I've learned from local racers, this car was built like this in the 70s from day one. This was, not a car that got transformed over the years. This was Robert McKenzie's original idea with it. So we cleaned this thing with mean green and Scotch-Brite pads and just anything we could use to just kind of scuff off this moss and all this stuff that had kind of grown on this car. And we cleaned the windows as good as we could. We cleaned the tires and wheels, and of course, our final step of any project cleanup, it doesn't matter how complete or incomplete the car is, you got to make those tires look good. So we sprayed a little bit of tire wet on there, and it was pretty much finished. That's the end of this car's story with us. We're probably not going to put a motor in it. We're probably not going to get it running. We're probably not going to do much else. But we're glad that we were able to get our hands on it. We're glad we were able to get it cleaned up, get a better look at this thing, and be able to find it a new home. Somebody somewhere wants this thing, and they want to build it. So we're going to find that person. We're going to give them a good deal on this thing. It's not going to be very expensive because, this thing's not really worth a whole lot. But the goal with us was to get our hands on it and enjoy it while we had it. And we did just that, and it's just time to turn this thing over and go find another one. Speaking of that, we buy junk all the time. We buy old drag cars, old hot rods, old motorcycles, old parts, just whatever's cool, we'll buy it. So follow along with us, hit the subscribe button, the notification bell, and you'll get updates every time we post, which is every Friday. But go ahead and hit that subscribe button so that you stay up to date anyways. And just stay tuned. We always got something cool in the shop. Thank you for watching.